Helios Vanguard slipped silently through the space between the stars, its engines humming faintly in the stillness of the void. Commander Elias Riker stood at the helm, his eyes locked on the far-off point where Earth loomed like a distant memory. The war against the Saurians had ended with a devastating victory for humanity, but the cost of that victory had been etched into his mind with every passing day. The destruction of the Saurian fleet had been the culmination of a long and brutal conflict. But Riker knew that this was only a brief respite. The galaxy was not a place for peace, and the humans' newfound strength would only serve to attract more enemies. Since the battle, Riker had been consumed by the thought of what was to come. There had been no time to grieve the fallen or to recover from the endless suffering. The war had taken everything from them, their homes, their families, their way of life. And now, as the dust settled, humanity stood at a crossroads. They could either attempt to rebuild from the ashes or accept their place as a small, fragile species in a galaxy that was ever more hostile. The Saurians were defeated, but the galaxy was vast. There were more dangers out there, more civilizations who had taken note of humanity's newfound strength. The decision was clear. Humanity had to prepare for the next battle. The victory over the Saurians had been a message, a warning sent across the stars. But Riker had no illusions about what that message meant. It wasn't just a warning. It was a challenge. The galaxy would come for them. "Commander," Lieutenant Kira Talan's voice broke through Riker's reverie, her presence pulling him back from the endless abyss of thought. "We've received a transmission from Earth. They're requesting a status update." Riker turned, his eyes meeting hers. "What are they saying?" Kira's fingers danced over the console in front of her, and the data streams filled the air around them. "It's a request for confirmation on our mission objectives. They're asking if the Saurian threat has truly been neutralized." Riker nodded, his hand resting on the edge of the command chair. "Tell them the Saurians are finished. For now, at least. But they're not the only ones who will come for us." Kira hesitated, clearly processing the implications of his words. "You think there are others? More enemies?" Riker didn't need to answer her question. The look on his face said it all. He had seen the signs. The Saurians had been one thing, but they were not the galaxy's only predators. Humanity's place in the stars was precarious. The Saurians had been driven by a desire for conquest, but Riker suspected that they were far from the most dangerous species in the galaxy. There were others, more advanced, more ruthless, who had taken notice of humanity's newfound strength. The Helios Vanguard might have won a battle, but the war for survival was far from over. "I'll send the message," Kira said, her fingers working rapidly on the console, "but I don't think Earth is going to like it." "I don't care what they like," Riker muttered, turning back to the viewport. "They need to hear the truth. Humanity is strong, but we're still vulnerable. We need to prepare for what comes next." Yep. The crew of the Helios Vanguard had been on edge ever since the battle. Despite the victory, there was an unmistakable sense of dread that hung over the ship like a shroud. Every moment of calm felt temporary, as if the calm before a storm. The Saurians had been defeated, but that didn't mean humanity was safe. Riker had spent years commanding fleets, surviving the horrors of war and watching worlds burn. He had seen countless battles, felt the crushing weight of loss, and always managed to keep his focus. But now, more than ever, he found it difficult to silence the questions that kept rising in his mind. What now? What did they fight for? Could they really rebuild? Humanity had never been a species that embraced pacifism. From the very beginning of their existence, humans had been a fighting species, carving out their place in the universe through sheer willpower. But this war had changed them. The Saurians had pushed them to the brink, and the consequences of that conflict would not be easily forgotten. The question remained, what would they do with this power? Would they become the conquerors, or would they fall under the weight of their own ambitions, which meant that the entire system tried to punish itself? These thoughts gnawed at Riker constantly, keeping him awake at night. But there was little time for introspection. Earth was still in ruins, and humanity's survival was still far from guaranteed. Their fleets had been shattered, and their ability to defend themselves had been stretched to the breaking point. The Saurians might have been beaten back, but there was nothing preventing another species from seeing humanity as a threat to be eliminated. "What's the situation on Earth?" Riker asked, turning to Kira once more. She was at her post, scanning through the incoming reports. "Earth is recovering. Slowly. The global governments are attempting to rebuild, but resources are stretched thin. The damage is significant, and there's growing concern about further attacks." Riker exhaled sharply, his fingers curling into fists. The rebuilding process would take decades, if humanity was lucky. Earth had been devastated by the Saurians' relentless assault. Cities had been reduced to rubble, and millions had perished. There was a significant loss of life, and the scars of the war would remain for generations. And yet, in the midst of it all, Riker knew that humanity had endured, but they had also grown. The war had forged something new, something powerful. Humanity had tasted victory, and they would never forget it. "Prepare for departure," Riker ordered, his voice firm. "We're not waiting around for the next attack. We need to be proactive. Send a message to Earth. Let them know that we're ready to fight." Kira's eyes widened. "Ready to fight? You mean you want us to launch a preemptive strike?" "On whom?" Protoss asked. Kira shook her head. Riker turned to her, his expression resolute. "We don't wait for them to come to us. We take the fight to them. We show the galaxy what humanity is capable of." The days turned into weeks, and Riker's resolve only hardened. The Aelios Vanguard continued its patrol, scanning for any sign of trouble. The crew was on edge, every alert setting their nerves on fire. Every distant signal, every flash of light was a potential threat. And still, no one came. The universe was quiet. Too quiet. Riker couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, though. He had been in enough battles to know that silence before a fight was dangerous. The calm before the storm was never truly peaceful. His gut told him that the Saurians wouldn't be the last. They were just the first wave in a much larger game. And then it came. A signal, unlike anything they had encountered before. Kira looked up from her console, her face pale. "Commander, this is it. We've detected an unknown fleet. It's large. Very large." Riker stood up, his eyes narrowing. The fleet wasn't Saurian. This was something new, something bigger. "Show me," he said, his voice steady despite the rising tension in his chest. The tactical screen flickered to life, displaying the incoming fleet. The ships were unlike anything humanity had ever seen before. Massive, elegant vessels that seemed to hum with a dark energy. The unknown ships were unlike any species the humans had fought before. Their design was organic, their lines curved and fluid, and they moved with a grace that made the Saurian warships seem clunky in comparison. Kira's voice was trembling when she spoke again. It's not just one fleet. There are several, and they're coming fast." Riker's mind raced as the first instinctive shockwave of fear hit him, but he quickly suppressed it. This was exactly what he had feared. Humanity had become a target. The message had been sent, and now it was time to face the consequences. "Get a message out to Earth. We need reinforcements. Now!" Riker's command was decisive, "and prepare the ship for battle." He looked at the crew, seeing the same fear in their eyes that had gripped him all those years ago. The fear of the unknown, of an enemy that had never been seen before, an enemy that would not play by the rules. But Riker knew what had to be done. Humanity had fought this fight before, and they would fight it again. The unknown fleet loomed closer, its shadow stretching across the galaxy like a gathering storm. Riker's grip tightened on the command chair as he prepared for what was to come. The Saurians had been the first wave, but they wouldn't be the last. It was time to make humanity stand in a galaxy that had just learned to fear them. The war was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. And this time, humanity would be ready. The year was 2435, and humanity had long since stretched its reach across the stars. Once the galaxy had been an untamed expanse, waiting for species to rise and conquer it. Now it was a graveyard of ambitions and broken dreams. Colonies that humanity had founded on distant worlds, hoping to secure a future free from the political and resource conflicts that plagued Earth, had become battlegrounds. The endless expansion of alien civilizations had not brought peace, but war. And in the chaos, humanity had become a target. Of all the alien races humanity had encountered, the Saurians were the most dangerous. Towering reptilian creatures with scaly skin that shimmered like obsidian, the Saurians had appeared out of nowhere, their vast fleet emerging from deep space with no warning. Their technology was far beyond humanity's, and their appetite for conquest was insatiable. The Saurians took what they wanted, and when the humans had stood against them, they responded with brutal force. For decades, humanity fought back, but the Saurians had more ships, more soldiers, more power. Earth and its colonies had been pushed to the brink of extinction. Human Command, the High Military Council of Earth's government, had ordered evacuation after evacuation, retreating time and again as the Saurians advanced. The outer colonies had fallen first, then the inner colonies. Soon, Earth itself would be within the reach of the Saurian war machines. Commander Elias Rikers stood on the bridge of the Helios Vanguard, one of humanity's last great warships. The massive structure, built in secret, was equipped with the most advanced weaponry the human race could muster, and it was the final line of defense between the Saurians and Earth. The sleek obsidian exterior of the Helios Vanguard contrasted against the cold emptiness of space, a dark promise that humanity was not yet done. But Riker knew it was only a matter of time. The Saurians would find a way through, and if the war continued, humanity would lose. He could hear the hum of the ship's engines vibrating through the floor as he paced back and forth, his eyes scanning the tactical display. The Saurian fleet had already broken through the first outer defense ring, and their ships were closing in on the remaining colonies. Riker's jaw tightened. There were no more reinforcements coming. The last hope for humanity's survival was on his shoulders. If the Saurians were to be stopped, it would have to be him and his crew did it. "Commander," said Lieutenant Kira Talan, her voice urgent but controlled, "the Saurian fleet is massing just outside the Beta Quadrant. They're preparing for the final assault. We don't have much time." Riker looked at the tactical display. The Saurians had gathered their forces in a formation that suggested they were preparing for a massive strike. The thought of fighting back seemed almost laughable. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. Humanity had been on the defensive for far too long. They had given up colonies, resources, and even their pride. But now, Riker felt something stir within him, a cold fire. It was not just about survival anymore. It was about something more, something deeper. It was about taking control, about sending a message. "How many ships do we have in the fleet?" Riker asked, his voice low but his tone carrying an undercurrent of determination. "Only 5, including the Helios Vanguard," Kira replied. "We can't win a war this way, Commander. The Saurians have more than 100 ships in their armada. We'd be wiped out before we even made a dent." Riker paused. He had spent years running from the Saurians, trying to protect what little remained of humanity. But now, the thought of running, of hiding, was no longer an option. They had reached the end of the line, and it was time to send a message. "We're not running," Riker said, his voice steel. "We're going to strike first." Kira blinked. "What? Sir, that's—" "Listen to me," Riker interrupted. "We've been running for too long. The Saurians think they can conquer us. They think we're weak. It's time to show them just how wrong they are." He turned toward General Melina Voss, who had just entered the room. She was tall and imposing, a woman who had seen the horrors of war firsthand. Her eyes, though hard and resolute, betrayed a hint of doubt. "General, do you have the final transmission from command?" Melina said. He nodded. Melina nodded, her hand gripping the datapad tightly. "We've decoded the message. It's not what we expected. Human command is giving us full authorization to do whatever it takes." Riker's gaze hardened. "Then it's time to deliver it." Melina looked at him carefully. "Exactly, and we're going to make sure they understand that this isn't just a war for survival. This is our message to the galaxy. We are not going to lose." Riker's words were like a command to his own heart, a final rallying cry for what was left of humanity. Melina stared at him for a long moment before nodding, her resolve matching his own. "Understood. I'll begin the preparations." As she moved away, Riker turned back to Kira, his eyes flicking toward the viewport. "Send the message, now." Kira hesitated, her fingers hovering over the console. The command was simple but profound. The Saurians needed to understand what they were about to face, what humanity was capable of. She keyed in the final sequence, and the comm system hummed to life. "This is Commander Elias Riker of the Helios Vanguard. To the Saurian High Command, hear this. Since you chose war, let us show you how it's done." The message was clear, concise, and brutal. It was a declaration, not just of battle, but of humanity's will to fight until the very end. Riker wasn't asking for peace. He was demanding respect, and he was ready to do whatever it took to make that happen. But in the space above the colonies, the Saurians had gathered in their final formation, expecting an easy victory. Their ships, massive, black behemoths, bloomed over the small human fleet. The Saurians had no idea what was coming. "Commander, the Saurian fleet is moving into position," Kira said, her voice cold. "They're preparing to fire." Riker turned to face the screen, his face set in a grim mask of determination. "Activate all weapons," he ordered. "Prepare to engage." The Helios Vanguard shuddered as its massive cannons powered up, charging for their first volley. Riker didn't flinch. He'd been in enough battles to know that the first shot was always the most important. This wasn't just about killing enemies. This was about sending a message that the galaxy would never forget. The first wave of fire tore through the void, hitting the Saurian fleet with unrelenting force. Plasma torpedoes streaked across the sky, their glow a stark contrast against the blackness of space. The Saurians returned fire immediately, but their shots were clumsy, ineffective against the precision and power of the Helios Vanguard. "Keep the pressure on them," Riker shouted. "We need to break their formation." The human fleet moved in, firing on all fronts, their weapons cutting through Saurian ships like a hot knife through butter. The Saurians were overwhelmed, their shields collapsing under the constant barrage. It was a war of attrition now, and humanity had the edge. The human soldiers, enhanced with nanotechnology and cybernetic implants, moved with precision, their tactics ruthless. The Saurians couldn't keep up. But this wasn't just about winning the battle. This was about showing the Saurians that they had made a mistake, underestimating humanity. The Helios Vanguard unleashed its ultimate weapon, a gravity pulse that bent the fabric of space itself. The Saurian ships, unable to anticipate the attack, were sucked into a singularity. One by one they disappeared, swallowed by the immense force of the weapon. The human fleet moved on, unyielding. In the heart of the battle, Commander Riker stood tall, his mind focused. The Saurians had thrown everything they had at humanity, but they had not reckoned with the human spirit. This was their final act, a statement that no one would ever forget. When the last Saurian ship fell silent, a message was sent once more, this time to the entire galaxy. Since you chose war, let us show you how it's done. The Saurians had learned their lesson too late. The galaxy was forever changed, and humanity, battered but unbroken, had proved that it was no longer a species to be underestimated. The Helios Vanguard drifted through the void, a battered but unbroken symbol of humanity's defiance. Its black hull, scarred from countless battles, reflected the starlight like a dark mirror, each mark and dent a reminder of the countless lives spent defending their home. The ship, once the pride of Earth's fleet, now felt like the last breath of a species on the brink of extinction. Yet, it was not the end. Pest drew aloud, at least not for Riker. Not yet. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Commander Elias Riker stood alone in the observation deck of the ship, his gaze fixed on the distant stars beyond the viewports. The weight of the victory had yet to settle fully on him. The Saurian fleet, once an insurmountable force, had been obliterated in a single strike, swallowed by the singularity the Helios Vanguard had unleashed. Yet in the silence that followed, Riker could not shake the gnawing feeling that something had changed forever. The Saurians were no longer the only predators in this galaxy. Humanity had shown its teeth, and now the entire universe would know its hunger for survival. Nevertheless, the multi-planet war continued, and during the final triumphant days. "What now, Commander?" The voice of Lieutenant Kira Talon interrupted his thoughts, her presence filling the otherwise quiet space. Riker didn't turn. He knew she was there without having to look. She was always there, just behind him, a silent companion in the endless war they had fought together. Kira had been with him since the early days of the Saurian conflict. He had watched her grow from a rookie officer to one of the most skilled tacticians humanity had to offer, but even Kira could not predict what would come next. After the destruction of the Saurian fleet, what was left? Earth was safe, for now, but the cost of victory had been immense. Many ships had been lost, and countless lives had been sacrificed. The human race had barely managed to hold on to its place in the galaxy, but what would they do with their victory? Riker didn't answer immediately. Instead, he let the question hang in the air, unsure of how to approach it. The weight of the decision was crushing. "We survive," he finally said, his voice thick with uncertainty. "We rebuild. We prepare." "For the Saurians?" Kira asked, her tone filled with a quiet skepticism. Riker nodded slowly, finally turning his gaze toward her. Her sharp eyes met his, as if trying to read the answer in the depths of his soul. "No, not just for the Saurians." He paused, the reality of what he was about to say beginning to take shape in his mind. "For the rest of the galaxy." Kira frowned, stepping closer to him. "What do you mean?" "The Saurians are done. We've beaten them. They've learned their lesson." Riker's eyes darkened. "You think the Saurians are the only threat to humanity? That they're the only enemy we need to fear?" "No, Kira. They were just the beginning. We've made a message, a declaration to the galaxy, but the truth is, we're still a small species. We've made enemies of the Saurians, and who knows how many ones watching." Kira's face tightened. "You're saying the war isn't over?" Riker let out a slow breath, his mind already racing ahead. The battle had been won, but it had only escalated humanity's place in the intergalactic pecking order. The Saurians would return, no doubt about it, and they wouldn't be the only ones. Other civilizations, watching from the shadows, would now take notice. They would see the humans as a potential threat, or worse, a target for conquest. The Helios Vanguard had delivered humanity's message, but that message had only just begun to echo through the void. "No, Kira," Riker said, his voice softer now. "The war isn't over. It's only just begun." The silence between them stretched for a moment, both of them absorbing the weight of his words. Riker could see the uncertainty in Kira's eyes, a reflection of the same doubts he had carried with him since the first wave of the Saurian assault. He had known that the moment they won the battle, the real war would start. The Saurians would not forget the blow they had been dealt, and neither would the galaxy. "You don't think we can hold them off?" Kira asked cautiously, her voice steady but tinged with doubt. Riker shook his head. "I don't know. But I do know that humanity has no choice but to fight. We've made our stand. Now we prepare for whatever comes next." There was no more time for second-guessing. The war had taken everything from them, every last ounce of strength, every human life they could spare. But the Helios Vanguard was still standing, and they were still alive. For now, that was enough. Weeks passed. The Helios Vanguard drifted through the void, traveling toward Earth at full speed. The crew worked tirelessly to maintain the ship's systems, running simulations, scanning for any sign of new threats. The victory over the Saurians had been a fleeting moment of triumph, but the scars of battle had left their mark. The damage to the fleet was severe, and with Earth still recovering from the devastation of the war, there were not enough resources to rebuild quickly. Riker had expected the fleet to be all but destroyed, but they had persevered, and with their victory came a new challenge: how to maintain their position in a galaxy that was far from forgiving. The war had exposed humanity's weaknesses, and those weaknesses had not gone unnoticed. Riker knew they were being watched. New enemies, species who had once believed humanity to be too weak to challenge the galactic order, were now considering their next moves. The message had been sent, but it was only the first step in what would be an even greater conflict. The universe was vast, and humanity was a fragile species, still on the edge of extinction. As they neared Earth, Riker knew it was only a matter of time before they would have to face the consequences of their actions. The Saurians, though humbled for now, would not forget their defeat, and who could predict what other species would take interest in the newly emboldened humans? One evening, Riker stood once again in the observation deck of the Helios Vanguard, watching as Earth grew larger in the viewport. The blue and green planet was a welcome sight, but it also brought with it an overwhelming sense of foreboding. Earth had been the heart of humanity's power, the cradle of civilization, but it was no longer safe. The war had left it vulnerable, and the only way to protect it was to keep fighting. His thoughts were interrupted by the soft hum of footsteps approaching. It was Kira, her expression serious as she joined him by the viewport. The two of them stood in silence for a moment, watching as the home world grew ever closer. "It's not over, is it?" Kira said quietly, breaking the silence. Riker's eyes stayed fixed on the planet below, but his mind was elsewhere. "No," he said after a long pause. "It not—" "I didn't think it would be," Kira admitted. She trailed off, unsure of how to continue. Riker turned to face her, his gaze piercing yet soft. "I know. None of us expected the war to end like this. But we can't afford to believe that victory means peace. The galaxy is full of dangers we haven't even begun to understand. We've made ourselves a target, and the rest of the galaxy is watching." "We'll be ready," Kira said, her voice firm despite the uncertainty. Riker nodded, though a part of him wondered if they truly would be. He didn't know what was coming, but he knew they would face it together. The Helios Vanguard was not just a ship. It was a testament to humanity's resilience. The crew had seen their fair share of horrors, but there was one thing they all shared: the will to survive. No matter how massive the crisis seemed, it was within the realm of emotion control. Earth's surface was a patchwork of scars left by the war. The Saurians had not spared humanity's homeworld, and much of the planet had been devastated by the constant bombardments. The global population had dwindled as millions perished in the attacks. The remnants of human civilization were scattered, huddled together in safe zones where the Saurian threat had been pushed back. But the damage was done. The world was no longer what it once was. The planet's ecosystems, its cities, its culture, everything had been thrown into disarray. Okay, so far away from our purpose as a writer, let's try to find the emotion in the passage of time that has come closest to the state that would anchor Heidegger's convictions about ethics. But humanity had endured. Earth's leaders, despite the chaos, had pulled together a coalition of survivors, committed to rebuilding what had been lost. They were not alone, however. The Helios Vanguard had given them hope, but the road ahead would be long and uncertain. The war was over for now, but it was clear that peace was a fragile thing in the galaxy. Humanity had sent its message to the stars, and it had been heard. The question now was whether they could hold their ground in a universe that was rapidly changing. Humanity's place in the galaxy had been solidified, but at what cost? The Saurians had learned that they could be defeated, but Riker knew there would be others. Other species watching, waiting to see how the humans would react. Would they be able to survive the next conflict? Would humanity continue to fight for its place in the universe, or would they fall, another victim of the stars? The message had been sent, but the war, perhaps the real war, was just beginning. Riker's gaze remained fixed on the Earth below. The galaxy, for all its vastness, was never truly empty. And humanity, with its newfound strength, would soon find out what came next.